We're going to be joined by one of the co-hosts of the Pat McAfee Show, my friend, my colleague, Ty Schmit, for this week's Six Pack.
Appreciate it, Schefty. Hey, we're here. We finally made it. Super Bowl week. You're in New Orleans. It looks like the weather's pretty decent, so that's something I'm definitely looking forward to, getting down there. Nothing better than the Super Bowl week. Obviously very stressful with, not just being a fan, but having a lot of work to accomplish. But you got to feel pretty good being down there right now, I would assume.
Got down here Sunday night late, got down here with my wife and daughter. Neither one has ever been to New Orleans. This is their first time. Wanted to take them out last night, but of course we had some hang-ups, some travel issues. Wife locked out of her iPhone, spent 90 minutes on the phone with Apple. That was fun. And so here we are on Monday morning, trying to start the week right, getting the podcast going, Ty.
Well, there you go. Schefty, let's move right into topic number one. It's not typical where something happens the week of the Super Bowl and that's not NFL related that kind of stops everyone in their tracks.
Yeah.
Certainly the sports world. Luka Doncic is traded to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis, literally out of nowhere. We have Shams on the show all the time.
Yeah.
Everyone involved in this trade is absolutely shocked. I don't think it's hyperbole to say this is arguably the biggest trade in the history of the NBA. Just kind of trying to unpack this. What would be the NFL equivalent to this type of trade? Is there even an NFL equivalent?
Well, let me go into the whole thing about this, right? This past Saturday night was the first Saturday night where I didn't have to check on NFL injuries. I wasn't up on my phone getting texts. It was the first Saturday night where I said, okay, I don't have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to Bristol, Connecticut. I can sleep in. My wife and I are hanging out, watch the movie, watch some TV. And I woke up about 1:30 in the morning and saw the news and could not believe what I was seeing. It was mind-blowing. And I think I had fallen asleep for about an hour after it had broken. So I have a few thoughts. Number one, I wonder what Woj was doing that night. And people have asked, and I will say this, I guarantee Woj couldn't care less about missing that story. I guarantee he slept peacefully, blissfully, and couldn't be happier with what he's doing with his life. And there was not a single ounce of him that would have wished he would have covered that story. I promise you that, as well as I know him. And I haven't spoken to him, but I can speak for him without even having spoken to him. Number two, I love big stories and big trades. And I don't recall a bigger trade than that one. Now, I thought back and I posted a comment of a trade that a lot of people disagree with. Fine. I said Joe Burrow for Lamar Jackson. I'm trying to think of two athletes who are near the top of their sport, who are incredible at what they do. And a trade like that is made because I know people say Anthony Davis is on the other side of the mountain, 31, maybe so. Okay, so how about like Dak Prescott for Justin Herbert? How about that? That might be a comparison that's made out of nowhere in the middle of the season. It's hard to come up with an equivalent, but I would just say this. Probably the biggest NFL trade that was ever made, Herschel Walker to the Minnesota Vikings, Eric Dickerson in a three-way trade that involved the Rams, the Colts, and another team. I saw the graphic of the trade, and the Bills, I believe it was, with Cornelius Bennett. That was a huge trade. If that trade had come out of nowhere in the middle of the season, it would be up there. The thing is, I think this was like the first ginormous trade in the history of social media like this. Those other trades were not in a social media time. I brought up the Stafford Goff trade because that came out of nowhere, and that was right before the Super Bowl. And I know it's not on the same size and magnitude of this trade, but it's not altogether dissimilar, where you're talking about two former number one overall picks at quarterback being traded. And by the way, Stafford goes on to win a Super Bowl with the Rams, and Goff is still trying to take the Lions there, but they've been one of the best teams in all of football. That's about as close as we've seen. People floated, and I reported on this story. This was my story, the Clinton Portis Champ Bailey deal back in Denver. I believe it was in the early 2000s. And I remember knowing that trade was coming down, and I had known for a while it was coming down. And trying to get it. I wrote a column in the Denver Post that Sunday. We were coming back from the combine. I said the Broncos should trade Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey. And I remember being on the monorail in Denver International Airport with Bobby Turner, the Broncos running backs coach. He's reading the paper as we're riding the monorail together. He looks up to me and he goes, "Where do you come up with this crap?" And then 24 hours later, the trade was made, and Clinton Portis was traded to Washington and Champ Bailey to Denver. I always felt like that trade was personal to me. And as much as I love that trade and as much as that story meant to me, it doesn't compare to the trade that was made on Saturday night. That was a colossal trade. Love big moves, love big trades. Woj didn't miss it one bit. Great job by Shams getting it. And everybody's still talking about it and will be talking about it for a long period of time to come.
Definitely. I mean, I think the craziest thing is Jason Kidd didn't know, Luka didn't know, LeBron didn't know. It's almost like they just all of a sudden, that Supermax is coming up for Luka. They got cold feet. Hey, this guy's not in good shape. He's not conditioned. Let's pull the parachute right now. Because I was in a similar situation. The Royal Rumble was here in Indianapolis on Saturday night. Pretty much the whole office went to that. I went to bed and woke up, slept peacefully all night. Woke up and I thought I was dreaming. I didn't know if it was like, there's no way. I mean, I either would have been tipped off to this somehow or some way, but who knows if we'll ever see a trade like this again, too. I think they said it's the first time ever that two all NBA first team, second team, whatever it was, Lucas had first team however many years in a row, but the first time they've ever been traded in the year after both players made all NBA. It's just crazy. It really is.
And how about this? How about one franchise that continually trades for a superstar player that carries forth its franchise? I hope I don't get any of my facts wrong here. I haven't checked on this. I haven't looked at it, but the thought just occurred to me. I believe the Lakers traded for Will Chamberlain. I believe they traded for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I believe they traded for the draft picks that turned out to be Magic Johnson. I believe they traded for Kobe Bryant. I believe they traded for Pau Gasol. I believe they traded for Shaquille O'Neal. I believe they traded for LeBron. They just signed, and now they've traded for Luka Doncic. Has there ever been one franchise in any sport that has ever traded for more Hall of Fame talent than the Los Angeles Lakers? Again, we had not even talked about this, but it occurred to me. There's no way. There's not a franchise in all of sports that ever has been able to trade for all the Hall of Fame players that the Lakers have done. And now, how does one franchise do it? That's incredible to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you off the top of the head, you'd maybe say like the Yankees, but most of their damage is done in free agency. They've had a couple, big time trades, but I agree. I mean, or at least, there's one thing with trading for a perennial all-star and a big time player, but trading for a guy who will be the face of the franchise and carry the franchise on for the next 5 to 7 years, definitely no one has done that the way the Lakers have.
Traded for all-time players, not just Hall of Fame players. Will Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Luka. That's unbelievable to me.
Yeah, it's wild. And honestly, for a guy who usually just watches the NBA, around the time the playoffs start, like this has got a little more, like you bet your ass I will be watching that first game, Luka plays wearing, Lakers colors. So it's wild. It's crazy. It's pretty cool that we get something like that over the weekend, as we're kind of preparing for all the craziness of the Super Bowl week. So still kind of in shock, but I appreciate the NBA kind of trying to take a bite out of the apple when they know that everything is going to be Super Bowl for the next, week and a half.
And I believe February 25th is the Mavericks versus the Lakers. And you know how big the trade was, Ty? We opened our six-pack in the week of the Super Bowl with an NBA trade.
Yeah, say no more. You're exactly right. So that's wild. Obviously something to keep an eye on. Let's move on to topic number 2. Okay, enough basketball. We did that, rightfully so. Let's move on to the Super Bowl, Schefty. Eagles, Chiefs. Ultimately, what do you think is at stake here in this Super Bowl? We've kind of talked about it ad nauseum, but let's really set the stage here.
Well, I think there's a lot on the line, as there always is for every Super Bowl. And if we just go back to last year's Super Bowl, the Chiefs win and sign their defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo, to a contract extension. And the 49ers lose and wind up firing their defensive coordinator, Steve Wilks. So I think we start with the fact, in a certain way, that there are always jobs and legacies on the line. Now, do I think somebody's getting fired if they don't win this game? No. But I'm just pointing out how much this game matters to franchises and what it means. So I think we look at big picture. If the Chiefs win this game and actually pull off the three-peat, obviously, as everybody knows, as has been well documented, they're the first NFL franchise to ever win 3 straight Super Bowls. Never happened before. Who knows if and when it'll happen again? So that would be something that would be forever, and it would always stand up. Andy Reid's going to the Hall of Fame. Patrick Mahomes is going to the Hall of Fame. Travis Kelce is going to the Hall of Fame. Chris Jones is going to the Hall of Fame. I would say a victory in this game almost would clear the path for Steve Spagnuolo to go to the Hall of Fame, the Chiefs defensive coordinator. He might get in now anyway without this game, but if he becomes the defensive coordinator of a team that has won 3 straight Super Bowls where their defense has played the way it has and carried this team this season, I think Steve Spagnuolo has almost punched his ticket to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And on the flip side, if the Eagles get in, a man on the hot seat, Nick Sirianni, who we talked about whether he should be fired, he's going to wind up getting a contract extension. Forget about being fired, right? We're going to talk about the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman, who was almost once run off by Chip Kelly, who we'll talk about in this podcast, probably going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. As a guy who built rosters that won 2 separate Super Bowls, that's been to, 6 conference championship games. I think he greases his skids towards Canton whenever his career is over. And then, of course, you stop all the Jalen Hurts questions and add to his legacy. Saquon Barkley, if he wins this game, will there ever have been a single free agent in NFL history outside of Reggie White, maybe, that made quite an impact on one franchise the way that Saquon Barkley will have for the Eagles if they win the upcoming Super Bowl against the Chiefs? I think you just think big picture and what this would mean to a lot of people's legacies. And there's a lot on the line in this game because of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why, all the talk about people not being excited about the Super Bowl or having Chiefs fatigue or whatever you want to call it, I think that's kind of BS, because what I started thinking about more and more is like, sure, we have the Chiefs and Bills and Josh Allen not being able to get over the Chiefs in the playoffs. But if the Chiefs win again and Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni and the Eagles lose 2 Super Bowls, we're talking about kind of a new rivalry here. I think it doesn't seem like the Eagles are really going anywhere. We know the Chiefs aren't going anywhere. Is this going to be, kind of the next real rivalry, AFC, NFC, that's going to carry us through the next several years? Because, I mean, we talked about it. You lose that first Super Bowl like Jalen Hurts did. Very rarely a lot of times guys never make it back. And here he is, 2 years later, already back in this game. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the Chiefs speaks for itself, history, immortality, all that kind of stuff. But like you mentioned, I think the Eagles have quite a bit to play for as well.
Yeah, there is a lot on the line for both teams, period. And that's why no matter how boring people might think the Super Bowl matchup is, please stop with it. It's going to be tremendous with a lot on the line.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's going to be an incredible game. I think we got 2 evenly matched teams. So obviously, if you're not excited for that, maybe, recalibrate your head a little bit, because it's going to be an incredible game. Let's move on to topic number 3 in the 6-pack. Shefty, you mentioned, some of the head coaching movement potentially. It seems like all the tea leaves are kind of saying, hey, Kellen Moore is going to be the Saints' next head coach, or at least that's kind of the way I'm reading it after Mike McCarthy kind of took his name out of it. Obviously, it's the only head coach opening left. What do you know about that whole situation with the Saints head coach?
Here's the deal with the Saints. Once again, the Eagles find themselves in the Super Bowl host city the way they did in Arizona, where the Cardinals wanted to hire the Eagles defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon. And now the Saints want to hire the Eagles offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore. You know how we know that? Because if they wanted to hire Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator, or Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator, they could have done it by now. They haven't. They want to talk to Kellen Moore again. And here's the other thing to keep in mind. The Saints want to make sure that they do everything by the book, Ty, that they don't break a single rule. Because the Cardinals, in the eyes of the NFL, broke the rules and were fined for it. They had to be disciplined. Remember on draft night, as the draft was getting underway, while we were in Kansas City, I believe, the league took away or had the Eagles and Cardinals switch draft picks. So the Cardinals got punished. So the Eagles owner, Jeffrey Lurie, feels empowered to press teams that he believes violate the rules while his team is in the Super Bowl. He's already won once. He's willing to win again if he finds evidence that anybody has tampered with Kellen Moore. So the Eagles are on the lookout, and the Saints have been in the crosshairs of the National Football League before. So this wouldn't be the first time. So the penalties and the discipline would be severe. So the Saints are going to go above and beyond to make sure that they don't violate the rules, which means they cannot have contact with Kellen Moore until after the Super Bowl, which is why their hiring process is on hold, why they're not doing anything right now, because clearly they're targeting Kellen Moore. Surprise, surprise. So barring those talks not going well and barring those sides not being able to figure out a contract, he'll be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints because he has to be. Now, could they go south to talks? Of course. We've seen that happen. Look at Liam Cohen and the Buccaneers. They had an agreement on an offensive coordinator. Look at Josh McDaniels and the Colts. He decided not to take it. Could Kellen Moore change his mind? Sure. Could they not get a deal done? Sure. But they are one of 32 jobs, and head coaching salaries this offseason have skyrocketed. I don't know exactly what Kellen Moore makes as the offensive coordinator of the Eagles, but I'm going to guess $3 million. I'm going to guess his coaching salary in New Orleans, would be $10 million. I might be off on the 3. I might be off on the 10 by $1 million in each side. Maybe he's making 2, maybe he's making 4, maybe he makes 9, maybe he makes 11. But we'll call it 3 and 10. You're telling me that somebody who makes $3 million a year is going to bypass a job that's going to more than triple his salary and make him one of 32 head coaches? You think he's going to do that in an offseason after which we saw Bobby Slowick a year ago be one of the hot head coaching candidates and a year later get fired? Like, no, he's not doing that. And that's why, again, at the very least, he is tracking to become the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand. I think they just think, hey, you're associated with the NFL. You're an offensive coordinator. You're making so much money that it's ridiculous. So do you need to go be? I mean, that's life-changing money. You're making an additional, anywhere from $7 to $10 million a year. Anyone is going to jump at that opportunity. You just mentioned Bobby Slowick. That came out of nowhere. What's he going to do now? Like, he's out of a job right now, And sure, the New Orleans job, I think a lot of people are saying that was maybe one of the least attractive openings of this cycle. But for a guy like Kellen Moore, you take that job, let's say it goes horribly wrong, you get fired, who knows what kind of contract he's going to sign. He's going to be getting paid as a head coach. He can go do what Cliff Kingsbury did. You go get an OC job somewhere else, and then boom, you're right back in that cycle. So it's kind of like a if not now, then when, I think. And I think a lot of these guys are kind of starting to understand that. My question would be, at this stage in the process, we've had so many different staffs be filled out, good coaches getting hired. How is he even going to fill a staff?
It's not a problem. It's not going to be easy, but there have been calls that have been made already.
Sure.
It's not like he's waiting for the Super Bowl to be filled and then, let me see who I can go hire. he's already been calling around to
Right.
build the staff. No
Ben Johnson.
surprise. So don't worry about him and his staff. It'll come together. And by the way, Dan Quinn was the last head coach hired last year on February 1st. Did it stop him from putting together an okay enough staff in Washington?
Definitely not.
Okay, there you go. It'll work out for Kellen Moore in New Orleans.
Okay, so yeah, there you go. That kind of eases my mind a little bit because I that's what a lot of these jobs. That's what I'm thinking. You know, you hear these kind of marquee names going. It's like, okay, well, there's another guy. Take him off the board. Speaking of that, Shefty, let's move on to topic number 4. We talked about this a little bit last week. The bad blood between the Bucs and the Jags. Well, people wanted to make excuses. Hey, time heals all wounds. It's not that bad. Clearly, these teams have, or at least the Bucs definitely have quite a bit of disdain, I think, for the Jags and the way Liam Cohen went about his whole situation. He tries to get a couple people from the Bucs staff, I believe, offensive line coaches, assistant offensive line coach. The Bucs say, screw you, pal. They block both of them. So what do you make of that whole situation? Obviously, now their feelings are out there in the public. We know that there is bad blood there.
Well, I don't recall the last time that a team blocked an assistant offensive line coach from interviewing with another team. Think about that, okay? That in and of itself tells you everything that you need to know about how Tampa views this situation. And I can tell you that everybody is very sensitive about everything. No one's going to say anything overly mean. And you heard the Buccaneers players at the Pro Bowl rightfully say, it's one of 32 jobs again. We don't blame Liam Cohen. But that doesn't mean that all the feelings are healed. They're always going to be there, I think. And I think there are people in the Bucs organization that are and will remain disappointed at the way events are handled. And I would even make the argument that Liam Cohen could have stepped to the microphone that day and apologized to the Buccaneers. But I think the Jaguars, honestly, are proud, as they should be, that they were able to pull this off, that they got the guy that they wanted out of Tampa. So for them, the Jaguars ownership, it's a badge of honor that they got this guy, that they were able to pull him out of Tampa after he had agreed to an extension that would have made him at that time the highest paid offensive coordinator in the game. And so they don't feel like, Shad Khan doesn't feel like I have to apologize for anything. I got my guy. But the Buccaneers obviously feel different. And so both sides are going to maintain their stance. There'll be a lot of plain talk, happy talk, congratulatory messages, but the messages, the actions tell you everything, Ty. They blocked their offensive line coach from going. They blocked their assistant offensive line coach from going. And I don't remember the last time that I ever heard one team saying to its assistant offensive line coach, no, you can't go interview for a promotion.
I think the being proud thing kind of makes sense as well because we know the NFL's, it's a dog-eat-dog business, you know, and for the Jags who haven't won in such a long time are kind of, I would assume, viewed a lot of other places as just kind of the pushovers, like, hey, well, but for them to do something like this and kind of ruffle the feathers and be like, no, you're not going to come in here and just bully us, you know, like, I assume that's kind of the identity they want to have going forward. So that, you know, they're not just kind of the forgotten about team down there in Florida. And who knows, you know, something like this. Obviously, everyone's got their opinions on Liam Cohen based on his introductory press conference, but it really does, you know, kind of signal and feel like, okay, well, maybe this is a new era for the Jacksonville Jaguars.
And it is, and they're off with it. And it's something that we're always going to be watching moving forward. The bad blood that privately, quietly exists between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Which I think is good, you know. Why not?
By the way, you want one more evidence of it? One more piece of evidence of it? We'll see how this works out. Usually those two sides have scrimmaged during the summer. Inter-squad, you know, joint practices.
Right.
Let's see if the Buccaneers and Jaguars have a joint practice this summer together.
Yeah, that'll give us something to talk about in the dog days of the summer for sure. But, you know, I guess the schedule is probably already made, or we know the opponents, so I don't know if they're on the schedule for this year, but that just screams like a bad blood Thursday night football game, you know, week 4, week 5. Who knows if we'll get it? That'll be something to kind of keep track of. Speaking of assistant coaches, you know, moving around, let's move to topic number 5 of the six-pack, Shefty. You mentioned him earlier. kind of out of nowhere. I think maybe some people kind of assumed it might happen, but Chip Kelly is officially going to the Raiders as their offensive coordinator. The reports are that he's making $6.5 million. He's going to be the highest paid assistant coach in the NFL. How did this come about, and do you like this move ultimately?
I actually like this move. And I think that the Raiders did a lot of work into calling around about Chip Kelly. And the reports that they got back were the guy is an offensive wizard. He knows what he's doing. And now you put Pete Carroll with Chip Kelly on a team that's owned as a limited owner by Tom Brady. Like, there's some star power. There's some people that know what they're doing there. It's kind of cool. I like to see it. And I know they considered some other options, but the Chip Kelly hire, I think right now, to me, I like it. Like, what is there not to like about it? They believed in it. They stepped up to pay him over it. It brings some buzz and excitement. Pete Carroll is a defensive head coach. I know he had Darrell Bevell in Seattle. He's been there. He's done that. Let's try something new. And they're doing that with Chip Kelly. And it's amazing how quickly Ohio State has also taken a few hits here, losing some valuable coaches from their staff. And I think, again, what stands out to me again here, Ty, is the salaries of coaches across the NFL and the college landscape has exploded this offseason. We're seeing rookie head coaches make well north of $10 million a year. We're seeing coordinators make $5 and $6 million. We're seeing some big time money go out to these coaches. And the latest one is with Chip Kelly, who now goes out west. And you've got him coaching in the same division with Jim Harbaugh. So we've got Harbaugh and Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll. Like it's like the Mountain West or whatever it was back a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, I think, having seen Ohio State through the entire playoff run, people, Will Howard, we had him on Pat's show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about how Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, how much better of a quarterback they made him, how great of a coach he is. I think he's pretty solid, too, in terms of if you don't have an elite quarterback, his offense, a lot of those short, intermediate routes, scheming to get guys open. Like, he can make a quarterback. I mean, look at when he was the head coach in Philly, that was the year Nick Foles threw 28 touchdowns and had 2 interceptions. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He can get the most out of a guy who maybe isn't necessarily an elite talent. And like you said about Ohio State, I think the writing was kind of on the wall. He did what he had to do. Ryan Day, his former, player, they're good buddies, obviously. He comes in, kind of helps him get over that hump, win a national championship. So you wonder if, again, these NFL opportunities, you're making $6.5 million a year. You don't got to be the head coach. You don't got everything on your plate. You can just focus on the offensive side of the ball. I think it makes a lot of sense for Chip Kelly, and I think that a great hire by Pete Carroll as well.
Should be a lot of fun to watch. There's some really interesting hires. That is the latest one.
All right, Schefty, let's move on to the sixth and final topic of this week's Six Pack. We're gonna get some clarity on the Hall of Fame this week. Eli Manning, obviously, at the forefront of that. Very interesting situation. What do you make of the whole Hall of Fame voting process and what we're gonna find out?
Well, first and foremost, to me, Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer. The only question is whether he is a first ballot Hall of Famer. And we're going to find out on Thursday night this week about whether or not he gets in. And to me, he's getting in. There's no need to make him wait. He should get in now, and he should get in now while the Super Bowl is in his hometown of New Orleans. It would be unbelievable to see him get in this week. Do I think he will? I don't know. What's interesting to me is that the Hall of Fame has changed the policies in which they inform their new inductees so that they can film it and present a TV special and have those clips forever, which those are some of the most powerful and emotional moments of a man's career. So Eli Manning knows whether he got into the Hall of Fame by now. We don't, but he does. And so when we set up an interview with this week's guest, Eli Manning's older brother, Peyton Manning, I was wondering, has Eli Manning said anything? Has Peyton been able to read any body language? Like, how does this work? Because when the Hall tells these players, I know there's a policy of secrecy, but they have to tell their wife. They have to tell, I would think they would tell their parents, like, do you tell your brother? Do you not? Do you tell your brother, I never heard anything, I'm not in? Like, how do you handle that? Every player knows. It's kind of one of the strange byproducts of the way the Pro Football Hall of Fame now handles its business. It's just how it is. And so, of course, that was one of the questions that I was going to ask Peyton Manning during the course of the conversation. And the answer, I think, was pretty typical Eli Manning. And there were so many great topics here that I wanted to go to Peyton about, not just Eli Manning. But let's hope that Eli Manning does get in to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because he is a Hall of Famer. He will be a Hall of Famer. And the only question now is whether it will be as a first-time inductee and whether he gets in on Thursday night.